Hello and welcome to the in-depth series of Drishti IAS. United Nations General Assembly is set to get on with its 77th session. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has went to attend it. There are going to be many facets that we are envisioning to get through the UNGA 77th session. So I'm repeating 77th. Why? Because it could be asked in your prelims. What were the highlights of the 77th session of the UNGA? So remember, this year it's going to be the 77th session. Very important session indeed. So these are the many points of discussion. We will of course know about the United Nations General Assembly. What is its purpose? The 77th session, why is it so important? And the goals as well as the challenges. India at UNGA, what is our aspiration and what do we want to achieve? Apart from that, the climate specifics for India at the UN. There are pressing climate issues that are ongoing at this particular point of time. India at COP26 and India's updated pledges, what India pledged in COP26, how it was updated later, and the question as well. Moving ahead, let us talk about the United Nations General Assembly. United Nations General Assembly is the main policy-making organ of the organization. The organization is, of course, United Nations, which is a specialized body formulated in 1945 after the Second World War by 51 parties. How many parties were there? 51 parties, to ensure that the world is peaceful for a long period of time. Now, it comprises of all the members of UN. Okay, remember this. Each of 193 member states of the United Nations has equal vote, and it also makes key decisions for the UN, including what else? It appoints the Secretary General of the on the recommendation of the Security Council. It could be asked in your prelims, so please pay attention. It can also elect the non-permanent members of the Security Council and approves the UN budget as well. So functions you have to remember. It could be asked in prelims. Moving ahead, let us talk about other important things. The assembly basically meets in regular session. The time period could be between September to December each year. And as we know, the last sessions were happening in virtual modes, hybrid modes because of the pandemic. That is why 77th session is important. Many important personalities are going to speak here. The first session held of UNGA held on January 10th, 1946 in London. Remember this as well. Now moving ahead, let's talk about the duration of speech. It is stipulated to be very well aware of the fact that there is an amount of time to speak at the UN, that is 15 minutes. That is of course reminded to the heads of state by the website of United Nations, but it is seldom kept and it is notoriously wrong. Okay, the longest speech was made to the General Assembly, clocked in at 269 minutes, that is 18 times higher than the stipulated time. This was done in the year 1960 by Cuba's Fidel Castro, and I have also took a picture for your convenience to remember. Okay, if it could be asked in prelims, we do not know, UPSC can ask anything. Now, what is the order of speeches? How does it go? First, we have to understand that earlier, no country was ready to speak first. Brazil was the country which stood up and said, I will speak first. So traditionally, Brazil has spoken first, and it is enshrined as the first speaker because of that. Because it is happening in New York, the 77th session is happening in New York. United States, being the host country, will typically speak second, but it is doubted as Joe Biden has went to the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, the late monarch. So next, who comes in line to speak, which country comes in line to speak, will be on the country preference and geographic balance, how to maintain it. It's not like only heads of states from South America are being called or Asia are being called. So it happens ad hoc. Now you might ask that only the members of the UN are allowed to speak here. No, certain very important states or regions like the state of Palestine, Holy See, which is the Vatican, and the European Union are also in the docket to address the United Nations General Assembly. Moving ahead, is the debate in UNGA actually a debate? Now, the culture of United Nations General Assembly does not lend itself to the notorious booing or interrupting, but first, the speech can be a font of evocative language. That means any member, if he or she is giving a speech, it can be very strong in nature. Okay, it can be evocative in language, raising emotions, raising visualizations. But during that period of time, the person might not get interrupted. Member states are free to exercise their opinion as a form of reply. They can refute any sort of criticism if they have received during the speech, or they can attack them also during their speech. So this is the debate. It's not very dramatic. Given India and Pakistan's history at the UNGA, we can also expect some drama. Moving ahead towards the 77th session. During the 77th session, that is from 2022 to 2023. Remember, it's happening in New York, and the Summit on Transforming Education, it was started since 19 September 2022, yesterday. General debate will start from 20th September, that is today, to 26th September, 6 days. High-level meeting will be there to mark the commemoration of 30th anniversary of the adoption of Declaration on the Rights of Persons Belonging to National or Ethnic, Religious and Linguistic Minorities, which was in the, of course, 30 years are being marked. So remember the date, also write down the year. So I have put all this so that you can know what all is going to come in your examination. Now, high-level plenary meeting will be there to commemorate the International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Date, remember, 26 September 2022. Okay. Moving ahead to the next facet, Belize will occupy the first seat in the hall. It's a country bordering Mexico in Central America, remember that. And who is presiding this particular meeting, the 77th session, not the meeting? It's Hungary's Csaba Kőrsi. So Csaba Kőrsi is a Hungarian individual who is going to preside over the United Nations General Assembly. Okay, so remember that this can be a favorite question of UPSC. Now, there are certain challenges under the shadow of which the current General Assembly is going to meet. Like the COVID-19 pandemic uncertainties, we are still not aware if new variants will come. We are far from ending the pandemic as of yet. Ongoing geopolitical tension, not only between Ukraine and Russia, but also Armenia and Azerbaijan, also many other countries such as Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, also other countries such as China and Taiwan. So many points of inflation are happening. Aggravating impact on food security because of that. Because fertilizer industry is also getting impacted by the Russia-Ukraine war, and because of that, crop is getting impacted and food security is getting impacted. Slowed down the global efforts on the 2030 agenda, the decadal agenda that we had, it has been slowed down. Poverty has been, whatever amount of people we were able to take out of poverty, they have been sent back because of the pandemic. Many other things such as women empowerment and education system has gone back. To bring it back, it's a challenge. Climate change, such as we are seeing so many cyclones because of the heating of the oceans. We are seeing floods, flash floods happening, deluge in China, deluge in India and Bangladesh, deluge in Pakistan. That is also the case. Terrorism, because of the digital penetration during the pandemic, we see that new faces of digital terrorism has come to the fore. Cyber attacks are one of those. So all these are the challenges. What are the goals to recover from it? Upholding the principles which are enshrined in the UN Charter. Also advancing sustainable development goals. Overcoming the impact of the pandemic, whatever we have mentioned over here. Stimulating development and combating terrorism. Apart from that, strengthening multilateralism, furthering the human rights and combating climate change, plus promoting peace and security. This need not to be elaborated. If you will go and write it in the mains examination, the goals of it, this will suffice and also give some examples. So India at UN, what does India want to achieve at United Nations General Assembly? We have certain envisioned points. Sustainable development, we want to have our perspective here. Financing for development plus terrorism and climate change. Also, getting the South-South cooperation through the help of India-UN Development Partnership Fund. and IPSA fund. This is the second. Bringing India's perspective on debates relating to human rights, especially to marginalized communities and women, children of India. Continue to advocate the need for resilient global supply chains so that vaccines can be provided and finally pandemic comes to an end. Counter-terrorism, what is the role of developed nations over here? What should be the transparency when it comes to listing and delisting of entities as terrorists in the Security Council Sanction Committee? So India has since a long time questioned this. This is also one of our envision points. UN peacekeeping mission, how India contributes, what India wants to contribute more, what our troops have been doing in different peacekeeping missions, those also will be highlighted. Along with that, there are certain climate specifics where India wants to work, such as the important thing we have to understand that COP27 will be getting echoed with the same climate specifics or an enhanced climate specific of the basic things that India has in mind for UNGA. The COP27 is going to happen in November 2022. It's about United Nations Framework, UNFCCC. Of that, only COP27 will happen. 26 happened in Glasgow, in which India gave the call for Panchamrit to ensure climate change does not occur at such an exacerbated rate. So in Egypt, remember that COP27 will happen in Egypt. So very importantly, this will be a pretext of that. Apart from that, Paris Agreement and United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, the goals under this will also be corroborated with whatever goals the climate change goals of India has. Now, India also has upgraded its plan, that will also be discussed. The United Nations Water Conference will happen in March 2023 to ensure the sustainable, judicious use of water around the globe. The UN Biodiversity Conference, COP15, second part will happen in December 2022. So, these are the many meetings which will see an integrated amount of force, whatever India is going to go with in UN. Okay, and the adoption of post-2020 global biodiversity framework will happen here. So remember all the things. So if we talk about climate specifics, then of course India has in mind to highlight the Lifestyle for Environment movement. The Lifestyle for Environment movement was launched on World Environment Day in 2022. So what is the date on which we celebrate as a globe the World Environment Day? Tell me in the comment segment. So this Lifestyle for Environment movement is basically highlighting the need for the individuals of India to change their lifestyles so that the climate issues do not rise, not using certain amount of carbon emitting things, or not using plastics and nanomaterials of plastics, because when they go into the seas, they make way for themselves in the seas and the soil, polluting them. So all this is the LIFE initiative India has taken. India is one of the few countries that have delivered on its climate action commitments and nationally determined contributions which India undertook. 2 out of 3 it went amazingly in. Forest, that is sequestration of carbon, was an issue because of the designation of forest. What will be covered as a forest, that we will not talk about here because I have already talked about that. Increasing use of renewable energy going forward, as well as International Solar Alliance is one of our initiatives with France. Leadership Group on Industry Transition and Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. All this is important for you to write in your mains examination when it comes to highlights on what India has done with respect to climate change. Okay, moving ahead, let us talk about other envisionments. That is, let's talk about other envision points. So the global developed countries must take the lead in global transition towards net zero. Net zero does not mean that we will not emit any sort of greenhouse gas. It means if we do so, we will remove it from the environment with the help of sequestration of carbon through the help of forest or other technologies. Because developed countries used their sweet time to pollute the environment because they went through the industrial revolution earlier than the developing countries. So because of that only, they have to take the lead. This is what India has said. So common but differentiated responsibility is important. That responsibility is everybody's. Every person or every country shares the same responsibility, but the differentiation of responsibility comes where? When it comes to providing the alternatives. Why? As developed countries became developed because of industrial revolution in their countries, they have much more money, finances, if we compare them to the developing countries. So they are in a better position to undo whatever wrongs they have done. And similarly, developing countries, when they become developed, they will of course do the same. Developing countries will be peaking later. That means right now we want to ensure that developed countries, they peak their carbon and their greenhouse gas emission, so that later on they leave that space for the developing countries and the amount of greenhouse gas in the environment becomes balanced and not spike all of a sudden. Vacate the carbon space in 2050. Before 2050, it is expected that developed countries, they peak their carbon space for developing countries. So when by 2050, when the time comes, the developing countries can spike their carbon emission by using their economic activities, and of course we can reach the Paris Agreement goals earlier. The developed countries should in fact be net minus, not even net zero. That means if you are emitting amount 10 of carbon in the atmosphere, you should sequester 13 or even 15 or even 20. Okay, so this is the difference. That's why they are saying we have to go for net minus for developed countries. Now there are certain highlights that I have attached over here. India at COP26, India committed to achieving a net zero emission by 2070 at the COP. It would source 50% of energy from renewable sources, hike renewable capacity of 500 gigawatt by 2030. It would cut emission intensity by 33 to 35% of GDP from 2005 to 2030 level. This was the earlier NDC. This was our earlier pledge. Now, of course, it has been revised. We will know that as well. Now, this promise was made back in 2021. But by the time, India has already achieved a 24% reduction in emission intensity. That is why we have revised it. 40% of its power comes from non-fossil sources. That means renewable energy. And it has announced a green hydrogen mission to cut methane emissions. So India went very well with this. The upgraded promise gives us that India now stands committed to reduce emission intensity of its GDP by 45%. Okay, from 2005 to 2030 level. India already is going very good here. Achieve about 50% cumulative electric power installed capacity from renewable energy or non-fossil fuel based sources by 2030, and life we have already talked about. Okay, and this was the earlier one. Earlier it was 40% of energy from non-fossil sources, 30 to 35% from the atmosphere we had to reduce the intensity of emissions and create an additional sink of 2.5 to 3 billion metric tons, 3 billion tons, not metric tons, 3 billion tons of CO2. So this goal was a little off the charts, I told you why, but these two were well established. So now let us look at our question. Where did the UNFCCC COP24 take place? In which country, you have to tell me. Okay. And now let me take the names of those who have answered my last question correctly. Okay. Just stay with me. And now let's take the names. Actually, the correct answer was D. None of the statements were correct. Okay. So the correct answer is D, and few people have answered it. Very few people have answered it correctly. Not many have answered it correctly. So Shravanti has answered it correctly. Then also Ranjit Kumar has answered it correctly. Chaya, Navneet, and why all of you have answered it incorrectly? It was very clear. The statements were very clear. Go back again and see it. Ashish, Bhavna, ORM, and also, okay, Vijay has answered it correctly. Snehal, Isha, and Devivji, and also Sai, Ajay, Mohammed, दिबाकर, अभ्यास, संध्या, श्रुति, and Raghav, Daksha, Himanshu. Also Abhilash, Mini, Srinath, Tanishka, Rashi, Rupal, Normi, Karishma, Nutan, Jyotirmay, Saurav, Malana. Then many of you have answered it incorrectly. Sorry, but you have to go and see that question again. Okay, D was the correct answer. None of the statements were correct. That's it. Thank you so much for watching. We shall meet again.